Sarah pulled the car into the driveway and let the engine idle for a moment. The house lights were off, and she knew what that meant. Another night of waiting, another night of excuses. She glanced at her phone, 11:42 p.m. No messages, no calls. Just like the night before and the night before that. With a deep breath, she switched off the engine and grabbed her purse, the weight of her hospital badge still hanging from the strap. 12 hours on her feet in the pediatric ward had left her exhausted, but that wasn't what made her shoulders slump as she walked to the front door. Inside, the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Sarah dropped her keys in the bowl by the door and checked the kitchen counter for any sign that Mark had been home. The breakfast dishes were still in the sink, exactly where she'd left them that morning. She pulled open the refrigerator door, the light illuminating her tired face. The lasagna she'd prepared on Sunday sat untouched, plastic wrap still tightly sealed over the top. Sarah closed the door without taking anything out. Her appetite had disappeared weeks ago. The living room told the same story it had for months. Mark's side of the couch had a perfect cushion, unruffled by use. The TV remote sat on her side, where she'd left it after falling asleep alone the night before. Sarah sank onto the couch and pulled out her phone again. Her finger hovered over Mark's name in her contacts. She'd been here before, too many times. The calls that went to voicemail. The texts that received one-word replies hours later. The promises to come home early that never materialized. Not tonight, she whispered to herself, setting the phone down. Instead, she pulled her laptop from her bag and opened the spreadsheet she'd been avoiding. Their joint account balance stared back at her, numbers that didn't add up to the life they were supposed to be building. Large withdrawals appeared regularly, always when she was working night shifts. Restaurant charges in parts of town she never visited. Hotel bookings on weekends Mark had claimed to be on business trips. Sarah wasn't naive. She'd suspected for months, but seeing it laid out in front of her made her stomach turn. 5 years of marriage, dissolving in a column of betraying numbers. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made her close the laptop quickly. Headlights swept across the living room wall as Mark parked. Sarah sat motionless, listening to the familiar sequence. Car door slamming, footsteps on the walkway, keys jingling, the front door opening. "You're still up," Mark said, surprise evident in his voice. He stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, hair slightly disheveled. The scent of unfamiliar perfume clung to his shirt collar. "I wanted to talk to you," Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "We need to talk, Mark." He shrugged off his jacket, avoiding her eyes. "Can it wait until morning? I'm beat. Like all our other morning conversations that never happen because you leave before I wake up?" Sarah kept her tone even. "No, it can't wait." Mark sighed and dropped into the armchair across from her, maintaining distance as he had for months. "What's so important?" Sarah opened the laptop again and turned it toward him. "I know about the withdrawals, Mark. I know about the hotels. I know about all of it." His face changed, shifting from exhaustion to something harder, more defensive. "You've been checking up on me? Going through our accounts." "There are accounts, Mark. Our money. Our marriage." Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. "At least, I thought they were." Mark ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she once found endearing. Now it just seemed calculated, buying time to formulate another lie. "It's not what you think, Sarah. Work has been, don't." Sarah cut him off. "Please don't lie to me again. I deserve that much." The silence between them stretched, filled with 5 years of shared history and months of growing distance. "I can't do this anymore," Sarah finally said. "I can't keep pretending everything's okay when I come home to an empty house every night. I can't keep making excuses for you to my parents, to our friends. I can't keep loving someone who doesn't love me back." "That's not fair," Mark protested, but his words lacked conviction. "I do love you." "No, you don't," Sarah replied, and saying it aloud was strangely liberating. "You might have once, but not anymore. And I need to start being honest with myself about that." Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm done." Sarah closed the laptop. "I'm saying that tomorrow, I'm going to pack my things and stay with my sister for a while." "Just like that? You're throwing away 5 years because of some bank statements?" Mark's voice rose, the first real emotion he'd shown in months. "I'm not throwing anything away," Sarah said quietly. "That's what you've been doing, every time you lied, every time you chose someone else over our marriage. I'm just finally admitting that there's nothing left to save. Mark stood up abruptly. You're overreacting. Let's talk about this when you're not so emotional. Sarah almost laughed. How predictable that he would try to dismiss her clarity as emotion. I'm not emotional, Mark. I'm just done. She stood too, suddenly aware of how small he seemed to her now. The man she had once built her world around had become a stranger wearing her husband's face. I'll be gone in the morning, Mark said, his voice cold. You can have the house tonight. I'll go to a hotel. Another hotel, Sarah thought, but didn't say it. There was no point anymore. That's probably best. After he left, Sarah sat alone in the quiet house. Tears didn't come, not yet. Instead, she felt a strange mixture of grief and relief washing over her. The weight of pretending had been crushing her for so long that its absence left her feeling almost weightless. She moved through the house, from room to room, looking at the life they'd built together. Photos from happier times. The kitchen where they used to cook Sunday dinners. The bedroom where they had once whispered dreams to each other in the dark. Sarah packed a small bag with essentials, enough to get her through a few days at her sister's. Tomorrow would bring paperwork, discussions about the house, the accounts, the dismantling of a shared life. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel the first tentative steps toward whatever came next. As she finally climbed into bed, her phone lit up with a text from Mark. We should talk again when things calm down. Sarah read it once, then deleted it without responding. For the first time in months, she fell asleep quickly, without waiting for the sound of a key in the lock, without making excuses for an empty space beside her. 3 weeks after leaving Mark, Sarah sat in her sister's kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Lisa moved around the space with the comfortable rhythm of a Saturday morning routine, making pancakes for her 2 children while they watched cartoons in the living room. You should eat something, Lisa said, sliding a plate in front of Sarah. You've barely touched food all week. Sarah nodded absently, picking up her fork without enthusiasm. I know. I'm trying. The divorce papers had arrived yesterday. Mark had wasted no time, his lawyers sending over documents that made their separation feel suddenly, irrevocably real. 5 years of marriage reduced to asset divisions and signature lines. Mom called again, Lisa said, keeping her voice low. She wants to know if you'll come to Sunday dinner. Sarah shook her head. I can't face them yet. Dad loved Mark. They all did. They love you more, Lisa replied, sitting across from her. And they just want to make sure you're okay. The truth was, Sarah wasn't sure if she was okay. The initial clarity she'd felt when walking away had been replaced by a fog of uncertainty. She'd taken a leave of absence from the hospital, unable to focus on caring for others when she could barely care for herself. I need to find an apartment, Sarah said, changing the subject. I can't keep crashing on your couch forever. You can stay as long as you need, Lisa insisted. The kids love having their aunt here. As if on cue, 6-year-old Emma came running into the kitchen, her pigtails bouncing. Aunt Sarah, can you help me with my science project today? Mom said you know all about how the heart works. Sarah managed a genuine smile, the first one in days. I'd love to help, sweetie. What's your project about? We have to make a model of something in the human body, and I picked the heart because it's the most important part. Emma declared with absolute certainty. Well, technically all your parts are important, Sarah began, slipping naturally into the teaching voice she used with young patients. But the heart is pretty special. Lisa watched them with a relieved expression as Sarah began sketching a simple heart diagram for Emma. It was the most animated her sister had been since arriving with tear-stained cheeks and a hastily packed suitcase. After breakfast, while Lisa took the kids to soccer practice, Sarah found herself alone in the apartment. The silence felt heavy after the cheerful chaos of morning with her niece and nephew. She picked up her phone, scrolling through missed calls and text messages she'd been avoiding. Several were from coworkers checking in. 1 was from her mother. 3 were from Mark. Her finger hovered over his name. Despite everything, there was still a pull, a reflex to respond. Sarah put the phone down without opening any of the messages. Instead, she opened her laptop and began searching for apartments. It was time to start rebuilding something of her own. Hours later, her search was interrupted by a knock at the door. Sarah hesitated, knowing Lisa had her own key. When the knock came again, more insistent this time, she reluctantly went to answer it. Rachel, Sarah said, surprised to find her former colleague standing in the hallway. Your sister told me where to find you, Rachel explained, holding up a paper bag. I brought lunch. And wine. It's 5 o'clock somewhere, right? Rachel had been a nurse in the pediatric ward before moving to a private practice 2 years ago. They'd been close once, but life and busy schedules had pulled them in different directions. I don't know if I'm good company right now, Sarah admitted, even as she stepped aside to let Rachel in. That's why I'm here, Rachel said, making herself at home in Lisa's kitchen, pulling out containers of food and a bottle of wine. Lisa mentioned you've been hiding out. I figured you could use a friend who isn't family. Sarah watched as Rachel found glasses and plates without asking where anything was, moving with the confidence of someone who refused to be turned away. There was something comforting about her presence, about not having to explain or justify her sadness. Mark's seeing someone, Sarah finally said as they sat down with their food. Has been for months, apparently. Rachel nodded, unsurprised. I never liked him. Sarah looked up, startled. You never said anything. Would you have listened? Rachel asked gently. You were in love. We all want to believe the best about the people we choose. There was something in Rachel's tone that hinted at personal experience. Sarah realized how little she knew about her friend's life outside of work. What about you? Sarah asked. Are you seeing anyone? Rachel shook her head. Divorced 3 years ago. He was a lot like your Mark, actually. Charming when he wanted to be. Absent when it mattered. I had no idea, Sarah said, feeling a pang of guilt for being so wrapped up in her own life that she'd missed something so significant in her friends. That's because I didn't fall apart like I thought I would, Rachel said with a small smile. Turns out, there's life after a bad marriage. A good one, even. They talked for hours, the afternoon stretching into evening. Rachel shared stories about her divorce, about the painful first months and the gradual rebuilding that followed. She talked about dating disasters and professional triumphs, about learning to define herself outside of a relationship. Sarah found herself laughing for the first time in weeks. The weight on her chest didn't disappear, but it lightened enough to let her breathe more easily. I have a proposition for you, Rachel said as they cleared away the remnants of their impromptu lunch. My roommate just moved out to live with her boyfriend. I've been looking for someone to take over her part of the lease. The timing seems perfect, doesn't it? Sarah hesitated. I don't know, Rachel. I'm not exactly in a great place right now. All the more reason not to be alone, Rachel countered. Look, no pressure. Come see the place tomorrow. It's nothing fancy, but it's close to the hospital, and the rent is reasonable. Plus, I promise not to ask how you're doing every 5 minutes like your family does. The offer was tempting. Sarah had been dreading the apartment hunt, the thought of living alone after years of sharing space with Mark. I'll think about it, she promised. When Lisa returned with the kids, she found Sarah and Rachel sitting on the couch, looking at photos of Rachel's apartment on her phone. You two catch up? Lisa asked, giving Rachel a meaningful look that Sarah pretended not to notice. Rachel might have solved my housing problem, Sarah explained. She needs a roommate. Lisa's relief was palpable. That sounds perfect. When can you move in? I said I'd think about it, Sarah protested, but without much conviction. The idea had been growing on her all afternoon. After Rachel left, promising to text details about seeing the apartment, Lisa sat beside Sarah on the couch. She came on purpose, didn't she? Sarah asked. You called her. Lisa didn't deny it. I was worried about you. You've barely left the apartment in 3 weeks. I thought seeing someone from your old life might help. Instead of feeling manipulated, Sarah felt a rush of gratitude for her sister's concern. Thank you, she said simply. That night, as Sarah prepared for bed on Lisa's pull-out couch, she found herself thinking about Rachel's apartment, about the possibility of a fresh start in a new space with someone who understood what she was going through. For the first time since leaving Mark, Sarah fell asleep thinking about tomorrow with something that felt almost like hope. The apartment Sarah shared with Rachel quickly became more than just a place to sleep. Over the next few months, the spare bedroom with its hastily assembled IKEA furniture transformed into a sanctuary where Sarah began to piece herself back together. Rachel was the perfect roommate, present without being intrusive, supportive without being overbearing. She didn't ask questions when Sarah spent entire weekends in her room, and she didn't comment on the legal papers that sometimes littered the kitchen table. Instead, she created a rhythm to their shared life that gave Sarah the structure she desperately needed. I'm making lasagna tonight, Rachel announced one evening as Sarah returned from her first full week back at the hospital. "And before you say you're not hungry, I already told everyone at the nurse's station that you're having dinner with me, so they know not to call you in for extra shifts." Sarah smiled despite her exhaustion. "That's playing dirty." "That's playing smart," Rachel corrected, handing her a glass of wine. "Now sit and tell me about your first week back while I cook." Returning to work had been both harder and easier than Sarah expected. Harder because every routine reminded her of the life she'd had before, the schedule she'd arranged around Mark's, the colleagues who still asked about him, the wedding ring she no longer wore. Easier because helping others gave her purpose, a reason to get out of bed when she would rather have pulled the covers over her head. "It was good to be back," Sarah admitted, sipping her wine. "Busy. Dr. Peterson has a new resident who asks a million questions." "Questions are good," Rachel said as she layered pasta and sauce. "Means they care about doing it right." Sarah watched her friend move confidently around the kitchen, realizing how much Rachel's presence had become a comfort in her life. Without her, these first months on her own would have been so much darker. "The divorce is almost final," Sarah said suddenly. "Just a few more signatures." Rachel paused, giving Sarah her full attention. "How do you feel about that?" It was a simple question, but one Sarah had been avoiding. How did she feel? The anger had faded somewhat, leaving a dull ache of disappointment. Not just in Mark, but in herself, for not seeing the signs earlier, for believing promises that were never kept. "Relieved, mostly," Sarah finally answered. "Sad too, I guess. Not about losing Mark, exactly, but about losing the future I thought we'd have." Rachel nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "That's the hardest part, isn't it? Letting go of the story you were telling yourself about how your life would go." "Exactly." Sarah hadn't been able to articulate it so clearly herself. "I had this whole timeline planned out. Kids by 35, a house in the suburbs, family vacations to the beach every summer. And now I don't know," Sarah admitted. "That's what scares me sometimes. I don't have a plan anymore." Rachel slid the lasagna into the oven and sat across from Sarah at their small kitchen table. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Plans can be overrated," says the woman who organizes her closet by color and season, Sarah teased. Rachel laughed. Organization and rigid life plans are two different things. One keeps your socks matched, the other sets you up for disappointment when life inevitably happens. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Rachel glanced at Sarah with an apologetic expression. "I may have invited someone to join us for dinner," she confessed. "My friend Daniel from physical therapy. He's new in town and doesn't know many people yet." Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety. "Rachel, I'm not ready for you to set me up with someone." "It's not a setup," Rachel insisted, though her too innocent expression suggested otherwise. "It's just dinner with a friend who happens to be single, nice, and reasonably attractive." Before Sarah could protest further, Rachel was opening the door to greet their guest. Daniel was tall with kind eyes and an easy smile that suggested he didn't take himself too seriously. He handed Rachel a bottle of wine and a small potted plant. "I never know what to bring to dinner," he explained with a self-deprecating shrug. "So I hedged my bets." Despite her initial reservations, Sarah found herself relaxing as the evening progressed. Daniel was genuinely funny, telling stories about his patients without violating confidentiality, describing his adjustment to city life after growing up in a small town. Most importantly, he didn't ask Sarah about her divorce, didn't treat her like she was fragile or damaged. When Rachel mentioned that Sarah worked in pediatrics, Daniel's questions focused on her career, her interests, treating her like a whole person rather than someone defined by a failed relationship. After dinner, when Rachel conveniently remembered an early shift the next morning and retreated to her bedroom, Sarah and Daniel continued talking on the small balcony overlooking the street below. "Rachel's told me a bit about what you've been going through," Daniel said after a comfortable silence. "Not details, just that you're rebuilding after a rough time." Sarah tensed slightly. "Did she ask you to come tonight because she's worried about me?" Daniel considered the question honestly. "She suggested I might enjoy meeting you, but I don't think it was out of concern. More like she thought we'd get along." He smiled. And she was right. The simple acknowledgement that they were enjoying each other's company made Sarah realize how long it had been since she'd had a conversation with a man that wasn't loaded with history or expectations. "I'm not looking for a relationship," she said abruptly, feeling the need to be clear. I'm still sorting through a lot of stuff. Neither am I, Daniel replied easily. My last relationship ended badly too. I moved here partly to get a fresh start. He leaned against the railing, looking out at the city lights. But I could use a friend in this new city. Someone to show me where to find decent coffee and which subway lines to avoid during rush hour. The offer of friendship without pressure loosened something in Sarah's chest. I can definitely help with the coffee situation. There's a place around the corner that makes the best vanilla lattes. Sounds perfect, Daniel said. Maybe we could check it out sometime this week. As friends, he added with a smile that acknowledged the boundary she'd set. When Daniel left an hour later, Sarah found Rachel waiting in the kitchen, pretending to clean up, but obviously eager to hear how the evening had gone. Before you say anything, Rachel began, I honestly wasn't trying to set you up. Daniel really is new in town and really does need friends. It's okay, Sarah assured her. It was nice, actually, to talk to someone new, someone who doesn't know all my history. Rachel looked relieved. So you're not mad at me for my incredibly subtle matchmaking attempt? It wasn't subtle at all, Sarah laughed. But no, I'm not mad. We're going for coffee this week, as friends. Friends is good, Rachel agreed. Friends is a great place to start. Later that night, as Sarah got ready for bed, she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. For months, she'd avoided really looking at herself, quickly averting her eyes when brushing her teeth or washing her face. Now, she paused, taking in the woman staring back at her. There were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. A few strands of gray at her temples that she hadn't bothered to color. But there was something else too, a steadiness in her gaze that was new, a hard-won resilience. Sarah thought about the evening, about how natural it had felt to laugh and talk with Daniel, how the weight of her past had seemed lighter, if only for a few hours. She wasn't ready for romance, might not be for a long time. But friendship? Connection? Those seemed possible again. As she climbed into bed, her phone lit up with a text from Daniel. Thanks for a great evening. Let me know when you're free for that coffee. Sarah hesitated only briefly before typing back. How about Wednesday after my shift? Around 6. His reply came almost immediately. It's a date. I mean, a friend date. A for date? That sounds terrible. See you Wednesday. Sarah smiled as she set her phone aside. For the first time in months, she was looking forward to something beyond just getting through the day. It was a small step, but an important one. The beginning of learning to trust not just others, but herself again. Coffee with Daniel became a weekly ritual. Every Wednesday after Sarah's shift, they would meet at the corner cafe, sharing stories and slowly building a friendship that felt refreshingly uncomplicated. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, and she found herself looking forward to these meetings as bright spots in her week. So my patient today, this tough-looking teenager with tattoos and an attitude, completely lost it when we had to draw blood, Daniel said, gesturing with his coffee cup. Turns out Mr. Rebellion has a severe needle phobia. Poor kid was so embarrassed. What did you do? Sarah asked, already smiling at the story. I told him about my first year in PT school when I fainted during a demonstration. Face planted right in front of my entire class, Daniel admitted. We bonded over mutual medical humiliations. Sarah laughed, appreciating how Daniel used humor to connect with his patients. It reminded her of her own approach with the children in her ward. Your turn, Daniel prompted. Any interesting hospital stories this week? Sarah hesitated, then shared something she hadn't told anyone else. I'm thinking about switching departments. Maybe moving to labor and delivery. Daniel's eyebrows rose in surprise. That's a big change from pediatrics. What's driving that? I've always loved working with kids, Sarah explained. But lately I've been filling in on the maternity floor when they're short-staffed, and there's something about being there for the beginning of a family that feels right to me right now. She didn't add that pediatrics had been Mark's suggestion, his practical argument that it offered better hours for when they had children of their own. Makes sense, Daniel nodded. New beginnings all around. They were interrupted by Sarah's phone buzzing with a text. She glanced down, then froze. It was from Mark, the first direct message since their divorce had been finalized last month. Everything okay? Daniel asked, noticing her sudden tension. It's my ex, Sarah said, still staring at the phone. He wants to meet for coffee to clear the air before he moves out of state next month. Daniel carefully kept his expression neutral. And how do you feel about that? Sarah set the phone down without responding to the text. I don't know. Part of me says there's no point in reopening old wounds. Another part wonders if some kind of closure might help me move on completely. No right answer there, Daniel said. Just whatever feels healthiest for you. Sarah appreciated that he didn't tell her what to do. A refreshing change from the well-meaning but directive advice she often got from family. I'll think about it, she said, changing the subject. Tell me more about this new hiking group you joined. Later that evening, Sarah sat on the couch in her apartment, still mulling over Mark's text. Rachel dropped down beside her with 2 glasses of wine. You've been staring at that phone for an hour, Rachel observed. Want to talk about it? Sarah showed her the message. Rachel read it and handed the phone back without comment. What would you do? Sarah asked. That depends, Rachel said thoughtfully. Do you have questions you need answered? Things you need to say to him? Or are you just curious? Maybe all of the above, Sarah admitted. There's this part of me that wants to know if it was all a lie. If he ever really loved me at all. Rachel took a sip of wine. Will knowing that change anything for you now? It was the right question. Sarah considered it carefully. I guess not. Whether he did or didn't, it doesn't change what happened. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Rachel spoke again. I saw you and Daniel at the cafe today. You look happy when you're with him. Sarah felt a flutter of something in her chest. Not quite anxiety, not quite excitement. We're just friends. I know, Rachel said. But friendship can be a pretty solid foundation for something more when you're ready. I'm not sure I'll ever be ready again, Sarah confessed. Every time I think about letting someone get close, I remember how certain I was about Mark. How completely I trusted him. What if I'm just bad at seeing people for who they really are? Rachel turned to face her fully. Sarah, Mark's cheating wasn't because you missed some obvious signs. It was because he made choices that had nothing to do with you. Don't let his actions rob you of future connections. The words hit home in a way nothing else had. Sarah had been carrying the weight of Mark's betrayal as if it were evidence of her own failure, her inability to be enough, to see clearly, to choose wisely. The possibility that it wasn't her fault at all was both obvious and revolutionary. I think I will meet with Mark, Sarah decided. Not for closure or answers, but to remind myself that I've moved on, that he doesn't have power over me anymore. The next day, Sarah texted Mark back, agreeing to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown that neither of them had frequented during their marriage. She chose a time between shifts when she wouldn't feel rushed but could use work as an excuse to keep the meeting brief. She arrived early, selecting a table near the window where she could see him approach. When Mark walked in, Sarah was struck by how familiar yet strange he seemed, like running into a character from a book she'd read long ago. Thanks for meeting me, Mark said, sitting across from her. He looked good, tanned, well-dressed, the same charming smile that had once made her heart race. Now she felt nothing but a distant recognition. You said you wanted to clear the air, Sarah replied, keeping her tone neutral. Mark nodded, seeming suddenly less confident than when he'd walked in. I'm moving to Phoenix next month. New job, fresh start. Before I go, I wanted to say I'm sorry for how things ended between us. Sarah waited, expecting more, but Mark just looked at her expectantly, as if his brief apology should be enough to erase months of lies and betrayal. Is that it? She finally asked. Mark shifted uncomfortably. What more do you want me to say, Sarah? I messed up. We both know that. We do, Sarah agreed. But I guess I was hoping for something more than a generic apology before you conveniently leave town. Her directness seemed to catch him off guard. The Mark she had been married to would have deflected or turned the criticism back on her. Instead, he looked down at his untouched coffee. You're right, he said quietly. I owe you more than that. He took a deep breath. The truth is, I wasn't ready for the life we were building. The stability, the plans for a family. I felt trapped, but instead of talking to you about it, I looked for escapes. It was cowardly. Sarah absorbed his words, surprised by his honesty. Why couldn't you have just told me that? Because you would have tried to fix it, Mark said with a sad smile. That's who you are, Sarah. You fix things. And I didn't want to be fixed. I wanted something else entirely. For the first time, Sarah saw their marriage from his perspective, not as the perfect life she had imagined, but as a prison he had built for himself through his own inability to be honest about what he wanted. I hope you find what you're looking for in Phoenix, she said finally, meaning it. Mark studied her face. You seem different. Stronger somehow. I am, Sarah replied simply. There was no need to tell him about the painful months, the slow rebuilding of her confidence. the new possibilities opening up in her life. Those belonged to her alone. As they said goodbye outside the cafe, Sarah felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with Mark and everything to do with herself. She had faced her past without being pulled back into it, had heard Mark's truth without letting it define her own. Walking away, she pulled out her phone and texted Daniel. "Free for dinner tonight? I have a story to tell you." His reply came quickly. "Always free for you. Your choice of restaurant." Sarah smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. She wasn't ready to put a name to what was growing between them, but for the first time, the possibility of something more didn't fill her with fear. And that, she realized, was progress worth celebrating. Sarah's transfer to the labor and delivery department brought unexpected joy back into her work life. The rhythm of the maternity ward was different, more unpredictable, often more intense, but filled with moments of pure wonder that reminded her why she'd become a nurse in the first place. Another set of twins last night, Sarah told Rachel as they crossed paths in their apartment, one coming home from a shift as the other was heading out. Both boys. The dad cried so hard when he held them that I started crying too. Rachel smiled, pouring coffee into her travel mug. "Look at you, emotional at work." That's new. It was true. Before, Sarah had prided herself on professional detachment, caring for her pediatric patients while maintaining the emotional boundaries necessary for the job. Now she found herself fully present in those sacred moments when new life entered the world, when families were born alongside babies. The department head mentioned they're looking for someone to develop a support program for single mothers, Sarah said, trying to sound casual despite her excitement. Prenatal education, emotional support, practical resources. I'm thinking about volunteering. Rachel paused, giving Sarah her full attention despite being half out the door. That sounds perfect for you, especially given everything you've been through this year. That's what I was thinking, Sarah agreed. Like maybe all of this happened for a reason. Not Mark's betrayal, but the way I've had to rebuild afterward. Maybe I can use that to help other women who feel alone. The idea had been growing in Sarah's mind for weeks. Her own experience had shown her how crucial support systems were, how differently her journey might have gone without Lisa and Rachel in her corner. The thought of creating that kind of safety net for vulnerable new mothers filled her with purpose. Later that week, Sarah sat in her supervisor's office, outlining her proposal for the support program. "I'm impressed, Williams," Dr. Chen said, reviewing Sarah's notes. "This is exactly the kind of initiative we need, but it would require a commitment beyond your regular shifts. Are you sure you're ready for that?" "I'm sure," Sarah replied with confidence that surprised even her. 6 months ago, she'd barely been able to get through her scheduled hours without exhaustion overwhelming her. Now she was volunteering for more responsibility, more connection, more life. "Then let's make it happen," Dr. Chun said with an approving nod. "Start putting together a curriculum. I'll find room in the budget for materials and possibly a stipend for your extra hours." Sarah left the meeting with a lightness in her step that carried her through the rest of her shift. On her way home, she impulsively stopped at a bookstore, buying guides on prenatal care, single parenting, and community resource development. The stack of books felt like a tangible representation of her new direction. At home, she spread the books across the kitchen table, making notes as she skimmed through them. So absorbed was she in her planning that she didn't hear Rachel come in until her roommate spoke. "Starting a library?" Rachel asked, peering over Sarah's shoulder at the books. "Research for the support program," Sarah explained, showing Rachel her growing outline. "Dr. Chen approved it today." Rachel squeezed her shoulder. "I'm so proud of you. This is huge." "It feels right," Sarah said simply. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Speaking of being where you're supposed to be," Rachel said with a meaningful glance at the clock, "aren't you meeting Daniel in 20 minutes? Sarah looked up in alarm. "Is it that late already? We're trying that new Thai place downtown. Just dinner between friends?" Rachel teased gently. Sarah felt her cheeks warm. Maybe a little more than friends. "We're figuring it out." The truth was, Sarah's relationship with Daniel had been evolving naturally over the past weeks. Their coffee meetings had extended into dinners, movie nights, weekend hikes. They'd grown comfortable in each other's space, learning the rhythms and boundaries that made their connection work. Daniel had been patient, never pushing for definitions or commitments. But Sarah had begun to recognize the look in his eyes when she talked about her day, The way his hand would find hers during movies, the lingering of their goodbyes. More importantly, she'd noticed her own anticipation before seeing him, the way she saved stories to tell him, how she pictured his reaction when something made her laugh. "Well, don't keep him waiting," Rachel said, shooing her toward her bedroom. "Go get ready for your not-quite date." Sarah changed quickly, choosing a simple dress she hadn't worn since before her separation from Mark. It felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Not the woman who had been married, not the broken person who had left, but someone new who incorporated elements of both while being entirely her own. The restaurant was busy when she arrived, but Daniel had secured a quiet table in the corner. He stood when he saw her approach, his smile genuine and warm. "You look beautiful," he said as she sat across from him. "Thank you," Sarah replied, accepting the compliment without deflection, another small victory in her recovery. "Sorry I'm late. I lost track of time working on the support program proposal." "It got approved?" Daniel asked, remembering their conversation from earlier in the week. Sarah nodded, unable to contain her enthusiasm as she filled him in on the meeting with Dr. Chun. Daniel listened attentively, asking questions that showed he'd been paying attention to all her previous mentions of the project. "You're going to be amazing at this," he said when she finished. "Those mothers are lucky to have you in their corner." "I hope so," Sarah said. "I keep thinking about how lost I felt after leaving Mark, even with all the advantages I had. A job, family support, savings. Imagine going through pregnancy and childbirth without any of that." Daniel reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "That empathy is exactly why you'll connect with them. You understand vulnerability in a way you couldn't have before." His words touched something deep in Sarah. The pain of the past year had changed her, yes, but perhaps not all those changes were losses. Perhaps some were gifts she was only now beginning to recognize. As they shared their meal, conversation flowed easily between serious topics and lighter moments. Daniel told her about a patient who had made remarkable progress after months of difficult therapy, and Sarah shared a funny story about her nephew's latest school adventure. It wasn't until dessert arrived that Daniel's expression turned more serious. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something," he began, setting down his fork. "I've been offered a position at the main hospital, heading up their sports medicine rehabilitation program." "Daniel, that's wonderful," Sarah exclaimed. "That's exactly what you were hoping for, isn't it?" He nodded, a mix of excitement and hesitation in his eyes. "It is, but it would mean more responsibility, longer hours, at least initially." Sarah understood the unspoken question. Whatever was growing between them was still new, still fragile. Changes in either of their lives could easily disrupt the careful balance they'd established. "I think you should take it," Sarah said firmly. "It's a great opportunity, even if it means we might see less of each other for a while." Sarah considered this. 6 months ago, such a question would have triggered all her insecurities, fears of abandonment, of being replaced, of not being enough to hold someone's interest. Now, she found those fears quieter, more distant. "We'll make it work," she said with certainty. "Both of us are building something important in our careers right now. That doesn't mean we can't build something important together too." The relief in Daniel's expression was immediate. "That's exactly how I feel. I didn't want to move forward without knowing we were on the same page." As they left the restaurant, walking close together in the cool evening air, Sarah felt a sense of alignment she hadn't experienced in years. Her professional ambitions, personal growth, and emotional connections all moving in harmony rather than competition. When they reached her apartment building, Daniel turned to face her. "I had a really good time tonight." "Me too," Sarah said softly. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility. Sarah knew that if she stepped back now, Daniel would respect her boundaries as he always had. But for the first time, she didn't want to step back. Slowly, deliberately, she moved closer and kissed him. It was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. When Daniel responded, one hand lightly touching her cheek, Sarah felt a quiet certainty settle in her chest. This wasn't about filling an emptiness left by Mark. This was something entirely new, a connection built on mutual respect, on seeing and being seen, on timing that was finally right. When they separated, Daniel's smile held a mixture of happiness and surprise. "I've been wanting to do that for a long time," he admitted. "Me too," Sarah replied. "I just needed to be sure I was doing it for the right reasons." "And are you?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. Sarah nodded. "I am. This isn't about the past. It's about right now, and maybe the future too. As she watched Daniel walk away, promising to call her tomorrow, Sarah felt no anxiety, no desperate need to hold on to this moment or analyze what it meant. Instead, there was a peaceful acceptance that whatever came next, in her work, in this relationship, in her continuing journey of healing, she was ready to embrace it on her own terms. 1 year after leaving Mark, Sarah stood in a brightly lit hospital conference room, watching as a group of 8 expectant mothers practiced breathing techniques. Her support program for single mothers was in its 3rd month, already growing beyond what she had initially envisioned. "Remember, there's no perfect way to do this," Sarah told the women as they shifted uncomfortably on their exercise mats. "The point is to find what works for you during labor. Everyone's experience is different." After the session ended, a young woman named Tara lingered behind, her hands resting on her prominent 7-month belly. She was barely 20. Her parents had kicked her out when they learned of her pregnancy, and she'd been sleeping on a friend's couch until Sarah had helped connect her with housing resources. "I'm scared," Tara admitted quietly. "Not just about the birth, about everything that comes after. What if I'm not good at this?" Sarah sat beside her on the mat. "Everyone's scared, even people with partners and supportive families. Being a parent is terrifying." "That doesn't exactly help," Tara said with a nervous laugh. "What helps is knowing you don't have to be perfect," Sarah continued. "You just have to be there, doing your best every day. And on the days when your best doesn't feel like enough, you reach out for help." Tara looked skeptical. "Is it really that simple?" "Not simple," Sarah corrected, "but possible. I see women doing it every day in this hospital, and we'll be here to support you." As Sarah helped Tara gather her things, she reflected on how much her own perspective had changed. A year ago, she'd been focused solely on survival, on getting through each day without breaking down. Now she was building something meaningful, not just for herself, but for women who needed exactly the kind of support she had once desperately needed herself. That evening, Sarah left work later than usual, having stayed to finalize plans for expanding the support program to include postpartum home visits. The hospital had been so impressed with the initial results that they'd allocated additional funding, allowing Sarah to bring on 2 part-time assistants. Daniel was waiting outside, leaning against his car in the hospital parking lot. In the 6 months they'd been officially dating, he'd never once complained about her irregular schedule or the increasing demands of her program. Instead, he'd found ways to support her, bringing dinner to the hospital on late nights, helping her research community resources, even volunteering his physical therapy expertise for a workshop on postpartum recovery. "Long day?" he asked, kissing her hello. "The best kind," Sarah replied, feeling the pleasant exhaustion that came from meaningful work. "We got approved for the home visit program." "That calls for a celebration," Daniel said, opening the passenger door for her. "I made reservations at that Italian place you like." As they drove, Sarah filled him in on Tara's situation and her concerns about expanding the program too quickly. Daniel listened as he always did, offering suggestions when asked, but mostly just providing the space for Sarah to process her thoughts aloud. It wasn't until they were seated at the restaurant, menus set aside and wine poured, that Daniel seemed to grow unusually quiet. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, noticing his distraction. "Actually, there's something I wanted to talk to you about," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "My lease is up next month." "Oh," Sarah said, trying to read his expression. They hadn't discussed living together, though they spent most nights at one apartment or the other. "Are you thinking of renewing?" Daniel hesitated. "I was thinking it might make sense to look for a place together. If you're ready for that." Sarah felt a flutter of surprise, followed by a warmth that spread through her chest. The question wasn't entirely unexpected. Their relationship had been steadily deepening, built on a foundation of friendship and mutual respect that grew stronger each day. "What about Rachel?" she asked, practical considerations surfacing even as her heart raced with possibility. "I talked to her last week," Daniel admitted with a sheepish smile, "just to feel things out. She mentioned she's been thinking about getting her own place now that she's been promoted at work." Sarah laughed, shaking her head. "You two planned this, didn't you?" "Not planned exactly," Daniel said. "But I wanted to make sure I wasn't disrupting your living situation before bringing it up." The thoughtfulness of the gesture struck Sarah deeply. It was so different from how things had been with Mark, who had made decisions assuming Sarah would adapt her life to accommodate them. Daniel had considered the impact on everyone involved, had taken steps to ensure his desire for progress didn't come at the expense of Sarah's stability. "I think I'd like that," Sarah said softly. "Living together." The joy in Daniel's eyes mirrored her own. Yeah, she confirmed. "But I have conditions." "Of course you do," he teased. "Let's hear them." "I need my own space, somewhere I can work on program materials and decompress after difficult shifts," Sarah began, having already given this some thought. "And I want us to find a new place, not move into either of our current apartments. Something that's ours from the start." Daniel nodded, clearly having considered the same things. "I completely agree. And I have a condition too." "What's that?" "We get a place with a spare bedroom," he said, "for when your niece and nephew want to stay over. And maybe for visitors, like your sister or my parents when they finally make that trip out here." The thoughtful inclusion of her family in his vision of their shared future touched Sarah deeply. It reflected what she valued most about their relationship, how they both worked to integrate their separate lives rather than expecting one person to fit into the other's world. "I think those conditions are very reasonable," she said, raising her wine glass in a toast. "To new beginnings." Again, Daniel clinked his glass against hers. "The best kind." After dinner, they walked through the park near the restaurant, making plans for apartment hunting and discussing neighborhoods. The evening air was cool but pleasant, carrying the scent of early spring flowers. "Have you told your family about us moving in together?" Daniel asked as they strolled hand in hand along the path. Sarah shook her head. "Not yet. I wanted to be sure before I said anything." She paused, then added, "I'll tell them this weekend at Sunday dinner. You should come with me." Daniel looked surprised. In the months they'd been dating, Sarah had kept family gatherings and their relationship mostly separate, still cautious about integrating different parts of her life too quickly. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I don't want to rush things." "I'm sure," Sarah said, realizing as she spoke that it was true. "They're going to love you. Especially my dad. He's been dying to have someone to talk sports with. My brother-in-law is more of a sci-fi guy." As they continued walking, Sarah found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain of Mark's betrayal had once seemed like the end of everything she had planned for her life. Now she could see it as a difficult but necessary redirection, a push toward a path that was ultimately more aligned with who she truly was. When they reached a bench overlooking the small lake at the center of the park, they sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the moonlight reflect off the water. "A year ago, I couldn't imagine being this happy again," Sarah admitted, leaning against Daniel's shoulder. "I thought that part of my life was over." Daniel wrapped his arm around her. "I know what you mean. After my relationship ended, I convinced myself that was it. I'd had my chance and blown it." "What changed for you?" Sarah asked, curious about his perspective on their shared journey. Daniel considered the question. "I stopped seeing relationships as achievements or failures and started seeing them as experiences, all part of becoming who I'm supposed to be." He turned to look at her. "Meeting you didn't erase the past. It just made me grateful for it, because without everything that happened, we wouldn't be here now." His words resonated with something Sarah had been feeling but hadn't fully articulated. Her history with Mark wasn't something to be erased or overcome. It was part of her story, a chapter that had shaped her in ways that ultimately enabled her to build something better, both professionally and personally. "I like that perspective," she said. "It makes the hard parts feel worthwhile." As they walked back to the car, Sarah's phone chimed with a text from Rachel. "Did he ask? Are we apartment hunting?" Sarah smiled, showing the message to Daniel. "I think she's more excited about this than we are." "That's not possible," Daniel replied, pulling her close for a kiss that held both tenderness and promise. Later that night, as they lay together in Sarah's bed, talking about the practicalities of combining households, Sarah felt a profound sense of rightness. This wasn't the life she had planned for herself 5 years ago, or even 1 year ago. It was something she couldn't have imagined. Richer, more complex, built on a foundation of personal strength she hadn't known she possessed. In the quiet darkness, with Daniel's breathing steady beside her, Sarah allowed herself to feel the full circle of her journey, from the breaking point of her marriage, through the painful rebuilding, to this moment of genuine contentment. The path hadn't been straight or easy. There had been moments of doubt, setbacks, days when getting out of bed felt like an insurmountable challenge. But she had done it. One step at a time, with help when she needed it, Sarah had rebuilt not just her life, but her sense of self. And in doing so, she had discovered that sometimes what feels like an ending is really just the beginning of a better story.